Yeah, I think on the sports side, as I said during the Billboard piece, they're really corporate by nature, right? Money is very much a part of, of sports, right? You talk about salary caps, you look at contract negotiations. The money's very front and center, and so I think when you get into money in terms of things like ticket prices, it seems natural that kind of passes through to the fans. Or if you look at, you look at FIFA and European soccer, again, there's all sorts of rules about fair play and, and how players are bought and sold. It doesn't exactly happen on the music side, right? I think that's a little more hidden. People have more, I don't want to say more of an emotional connection to music, but it's more of a brand, it's more of an association. They think of it less like a business, right? I mean, music has always been more about kind of being cool, being hip, where people are at and what they're doing, and less about the finances of it.
Got it. And so you see that playing out in what people's expectations are for tickets?
Yeah, I think it kind of passes through. So, there's a difference, and again, in sports versus music on people's expectations on what they're going to pay, right? A lot of artists will intentionally undercharge for tickets, knowing that that's not the right price, knowing that those tickets are actually going to get bought and then resold because, they get a bad response for fans if they're charging too much, right? Part of the experience in a show isn't just who's on stage, but it's who's there. And so setting those prices accordingly actually impacts the experience all around.
When you say who's there, what do you mean?
I mean, it's the crowd, right? It's who's in the stands. It's who you're at that show with is part of your experience. It's not just, what's going on stage. So you can listen to an album at home, but you go to a concert for the experience of being there.
Got it. And so the other thing too, and I'm sure you probably saw this as well, so like on social media, we've seen like a lot of the reactions to the Billboard piece. There are a lot of people who are kind of frustrated with the idea, like how could a band like Metallica or their representative make an agreement to sell a big chunk of these tickets immediately on one of these sites we see as like secondary or resale?
So I think the interesting thing is like these aren't really secondary sites. I think for the average fan looking at this, this is where fans buy and sell tickets. The reality is most of the tickets sold on these secondary sites are done by people doing it professionally. So it really is just a different distribution channel. So if you thought of it more like buying a ticket for a flight, right? You don't necessarily go to United Airlines. You might go to Kayak, you go to Priceline, you go to these other places because certain people prefer the buying experience in different places. There's never going to be a place that is the sole location that everyone goes to buy a ticket. And so I think the same thing's true in ticketing, right? StubHub spends a ton of money on marketing. Vivid Seats spends a ton of money on marketing. SeatGeek does as well. There's never going to be a point where 100% of tickets are sold on Ticketmaster. And so, as an organization, you kind of need to have tickets in all of these different places. Now, unfortunately, there's a, association with the secondary market and, there's a very negative connotation there. But if you kind of took that away and just viewed these as distribution channels, it actually makes a ton of sense.
So that sort of like visceral public reaction would be like, oh my gosh, I'm being upcharged and being scalped by these tickets professionally. You're saying, not quite?
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There are certainly times where that happens, right? There's certainly times where the secondary market is used for these markups that someone's not comfortable doing on the primary or doesn't have the tools to do. But a lot of times, it's just distribution, right? If you imagined, what if it was the same price on StubHub as it was on Ticketmaster? Would you think there was anything wrong with it? And so, if it's the same price or a consistent price, right? Ticketmaster has a restriction that tickets need to be grouped into pretty large areas. So you could imagine on one of these other sites that you could price by the row. And to be fair, Ticketmaster does that in certain places. Like they have VIP ticketing where they charge, almost row by row prices for the premium areas. Well, that's kind of just what's going on the secondary market side. So, I don't view it as very different. It can be done in a bad way, but it really is just taking advantage of these other distribution channels that have come about and have a lot of eyeballs.
And specifically as it relates to the Live Nation Metallica representative, agreement that was discussed in the article. Do you think Live Nation should be getting flack for this?
That is, that's a good question. Look, I think the key is transparency, right? If you go out there and say, hey, this is my face value of tickets, this is the only place you can buy them, and then funnel them elsewhere, yes, there's a transparency problem. If you were to come out and say, hey, look, we're going to sell tickets on all these channels, we're going to be consistent about prices across all these channels, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And so you're starting to see that. In the NFL, they've come out with a program called NFL Open, where the teams can actually direct post their tickets on StubHub and SeatGeek, right? Secondary market channels, but it's done at consistent pricing across the board. And there's been no public outcry. The LA Dodgers have done a deal where they're pushing tickets almost directly onto these secondary markets. Again, no public outcry. So I think the key here is transparency. I think the key is representing what you're actually going to do.